All right, we're live.
All right. Hi, everyone. This live stream is going to be focused mostly on independent reference letters. I'm actually going to show you on the screen a couple examples of real life independent reference letters that I've submitted in cases. Keep in mind during this presentation, there's no perfect letter. Like, I did not sit down and strive to create the perfect independent reference letter. I have some templates here and there. I have some past case samples. Every letter ends up being very unique, though. Some are better than others, but they all serve a really important purpose. And that purpose is to communicate to USCIS that you and your reputation are seen or valued as important in the industry beyond your tight circle of collaborators, supervisors, managers, and friends. The independent reference doesn't need to be from someone who you've never met before, but it does need to be from someone that you have not worked with before. So you haven't collaborated on projects, you have not worked for the same company. The person needs to know you through professional connections and through your reputation. It's very important that the letter actually states how the person knows you. And that means if you've never met them and say you're paying for an independent reference letter, the reference letter does actually need to say that that person was solicited by you and paid by you. So when you buy an independent reference letter through a service, the letter will state that the letter is paid for, and that's good. You do need that to happen. If you source an independent reference through your own network, it should say how you met. It should say what they know about you. It should disclose any ties that the person has to you. So, if you did work on a small project together, the person can say they're still an independent reference, but the ties to that project do need to be disclosed in the letter. And it's better if there are no collaborations and no ties like that. All right. In general, the letter needs to provide overall context for your field or industry. It needs to provide context for your role or your position. It needs to describe your major accomplishments. It needs to describe your contributions to the field or the industry. And then it needs to affirm your acclaim and your overall reputation. So these are the key points for an independent reference letter. I'm going to pull the letters up. I have two of them, two different formats. Let me see. I haven't actually done the screen sharing on this setting before. I think I can present here, share screen. Okay, great. This is very helpful. Okay. So it says the screen is sharing, but I can't see it on my end. Can you see this letter, Jason?
Yeah, I can add it to the stage.
Okay, great. Yep. Here it is. Okay. So this is a real client letter. I have changed all names. So I've changed all first names, last names, company names. There may be some names in here that don't really make sense. That's okay. Give it a pass. Oh, and it looks like I made one error there. But other than that, the content is all real. This letter overall is 3 pages. Usually when I'm drafting the independent reference letter, they tend to be 3 or 4 pages. Sometimes they can be longer. They can be 5 pages. And then if you pay for one from a service, the length also varies pretty significantly depending on the information you give to the independent reference. I always prompt them to put in letterhead and have the date on the letter. And then we have a line on what this letter is supposed to be about. Sometimes I'll just jump right in where I say, my name is so-and-so. This is what I do. I have 40 years of experience. I'm providing this independent reference letter on behalf of Mr. John Smith, who in my view is a leading expert in fintech product development in the US. And then you can have 1 or 2 paragraphs about the expert. So this is where the expert essentially qualifies themselves to make this opinion. We have here a really long record. So this person is a CEO, a founder and CEO of his own business. He has 40 years of experience. there's going to be a significant explanation of the qualifications of the expert. This next paragraph is super important. This is where the independent expert says how they know the person they're writing the reference letter for. So this says they met at a very particular conference. They kept up short correspondence, but this is independent and based on reputation for continued contributions. This next paragraph talks about the person's role in the field or the industry. So an independent expert should have access to the person's resume and should know some basic details about their career. So if the person is working for a particular company, the role should be described. And it's not like this letter is providing all the details. It's not like this letter is mimicking or mirroring what the supervisor or the manager letter is saying. But it should describe what is generally known about the person's role in the field or the industry or at the particular company they're working for. All right, then it should also talk about the person's major accomplishments or contributions. And this can be at a company, especially in this case, and I actually stated down here, the ideas of the things that this person has been working on at their company have been widely shared at leading conferences and within professional networks. So that information should be present. But you should have the expert affirm what some of the specific contributions are and essentially share all of their knowledge about those contributions. I do really like saying how the person knows this information. Like the letter shouldn't necessarily be sharing things that wouldn't be known at a conference or at a networking meeting or through conversation. Like you don't need to put too much detail into these letters and have the advisor sign off. Instead, you want the person signing the letter to really describe and attest to what they reasonably know through conversation, through review of the CV, through public information about the company, about the person, about the journals, about the conferences, and all of that. So I guess that's a very, very important point for everyone to know. Like getting an independent reference letter, I feel like a lot of people think is impossible because they think the expert needs to sign off on all of these details that the expert couldn't possibly know. So they just need to find someone who's willing to put their signature on it. And that's really not what an independent reference letter is. The independent reference letter is giving USCIS that overall view and contextualizing the person's reputation and the person's role and the person's accomplishments in a way that USCIS can understand. The expert can only attest to what the expert knows. There's nothing about this process that should be made up in any way. And there's nothing about this process that just should include a signature based on something that the expert can't reasonably attest to. So make sure that it's reasonable, make sure that it's real. And describe why it's real. Like sentences like this are super helpful for USCIS because they affirm why the expert is making their opinion and how they know the information that is in this letter. All right, so the paragraphs before were describing his general role and some contributions that he's made. But here we're moving on to some additional items. So additional ways that the person is acclaimed. So the expert knows that this person has patents and that these patents have been applied in real-world solutions. The expert is not necessarily describing these in detail because this expert may not know exactly how they're used. But on a review of the resume can affirm things like this. Additionally, the expert can affirm the publication record, confirm or affirm the citation record, talk about books and book chapters and textbooks and all of that. And then say things about how the publications have been received by the broader industry. That kind of thing is important, affirming reputation. All right, and then I always like to include how the person is serving the entire field or the industry. Usually, if you can get an independent expert reference from someone that you met at a conference, they are familiar with your continued work, your continued service, volunteer efforts, and all of that to benefit the entire industry. And all of that should be included in the letter. And then here, this referrer put a little bit of a personal note based on conversations that had happened at the conferences, saying that there's a particular part of the talent that stands out. This kind of paragraph adds a little bit of personality to the letter, and I like to include it whenever the person or the referrer should have something really insightful or interesting to say. All right, this paragraph is about a claim. Usually I would also like to put in a few more things that were missing from this particular case. Like if the expert is familiar with other experts who have endorsed the person that they're writing about, I would sometimes put in that information. Here it's super, super general. And then you have the actual recommendation here. It's important to note that in this letter, I don't actually mention EB1A at all. And I don't even mention extraordinary ability at all. Sometimes I will mention them explicitly, but sometimes the independent references aren't really comfortable with interacting with immigration law because they themselves don't know anything about the EB1A category or immigration law or the US government. And so they will want the letters to be more like this, where all of that is removed, and this is just a personal recommendation affirming key things about the person. All right, so that's one format for the letter. I also have another format, which I'm going to pull up here, that's much, much shorter, and this is what I call the outside endorsement letter. It is a form of independent reference. It's very, very short, and it usually comes from someone who is super important, who may not know exactly what the person is doing or like the exact details of their work, but the person is so important that their opinion should hold some weight for USCIS. In this particular case, we presented a letter from a state senator. So not a U.S. senator or anything like that, but the state senator knew the person, had been introduced actually through the university for a university event, and was really impressed with my client's, overall outlook, practical solutions, general demeanor, and really thought this person would be of value to the U.S. and should be admitted. And so my client was able to get the senator to issue a letter. This is not a real senator, so please don't look them up. I changed their name, I changed their state, I changed their committees and their name. Like this whole section is made up. It follows the format of the letter that we submitted, but the details are not real. So if you look it up and it's not real, just know I did change everything to fully anonymize this whole situation. But I'll just run through here. So this is what I normally include. I say it's an endorsement letter. I do actually say it's for permanent residents. And I think that's very, very important because the outside endorsement should be endorsing the person for a specific purpose. I say they'll bring great benefit to the U.S. It's an independent endorsement based on knowledge and a review of the CV. A short paragraph explaining why the person is important. It should be pretty self-evident why they're important, and so this is very, very short. Oops. Sorry, okay. It should say a couple of details. I actually redacted them because I couldn't figure out how to fully anonymize these details. But you do solution 1, solution 2, bullet point format, boom, boom, and that way it's very, very clear. I like including this kind of sentence. Attracting immigrants like Dr. Smith with this depth of expertise is a priority, and explains why it's a priority. And then talk overall about the career and why the person's career was impressive or important. Talk a little bit about involvement, mostly in a very broad and sweeping manner where you're kind of listing the categories of the person's qualifications. And then the endorsement paragraph is very important. So you can see how this letter kind of lacks detail, but still serves as a very important endorsement. The other letter had a lot more detail, but both letters are very, very valuable to the case. Both letters serve as an independent reference letter. and you can use either format. It is very important, if you take anything away from this conversation, to realize that there's no one single way to write an industry reference letter. There are many ways to do it. The key things are you need the expert's qualifications, you need sufficient detail about the accomplishments, you need sufficient detail about the acclaim that the person has been receiving, and you need some kind of affirmation or endorsement at the end. Those are the most important parts. All right, we can open it up for questions.
Sam asks, is a recommendation letter in a Word file generally acceptable for submission to USCIS? What file formats does USCIS accept?
USCIS does not accept file formats. It only accepts printed out letters. So you will have to submit these on paper. Yeah, everyone is still shocked. If they haven't actually submitted cases to USCIS, I know everyone is shocked. But yeah, I actually fully print out the petitions and ship the printed petitions to USCIS.
Do you provide help in drafting the letter? Thanks.
Yes. So whenever I'm working with clients on EB2 and IWs or EB1A cases, me and my team fully draft all of the letters. And that's not to say you can't make changes or your referrers can't make changes. Like, edits and changes are always part of the process. But we do like to control like what information is being highlighted, and so we do the drafting.
So I don't see any other questions.
All right. So Jason, I know you've talked to a bunch of people because there's huge interest right now where everyone is kind of asking, how do I go about getting an independent reference letter? What kinds of specific questions have you seen come up about this?
So one question that's pretty common is, well, I think a lot of people have, is should you pay for independent references? Especially, like one issue that a lot of people have is they don't know someone who is senior enough to comment on their work, or they don't know someone with specific expertise that could comment on their work. So they're thinking about paying for a reference. Is that a valid route to take?
It's valid, but I do think it's less strong. Like when it comes down to it, I would much rather be able to present a letter where the person says they met you at a conference, they did an informational interview with you, they know you through another professional acquaintance. I would much rather put that as an explanation into the expert reference letter than I would have a line saying about how this was a paid professional evaluation. Paid professional evaluations definitely have value. I use them in a lot of cases. So don't discount them entirely, but if you can source someone from your own network, it's almost always better. I will also say USCIS, especially in the EB1A cases, really expects you to be able to reach out to other people in your network, because part of the EB1A criteria, not the criteria, just the overall qualifications for EB1A, are that you have sustained a claim in your field. And so if you have sustained a claim in your field, there should be a lot of people who are willing to state that or willing to affirm that to USCIS. So even if reaching out to these experts is uncomfortable, still try to do it. Try to source someone from your own network. It will be better in the long run.
Janelle asks, thank you for this session. Quick question regarding letterhead. Let's assume independent reference is working at Google. In that case, do they have to provide reference in Google's letterhead?
It's always better to include letterhead, but sometimes that's impossible. The organizations are in charge of their own letterhead and not necessarily the individuals. And so there are some organizations that prohibit even their top executives from using letterhead, except in certain situations or contexts. So, I mean, I don't know about Google specifically, but it might be impossible for you to get letterhead. That's okay. The person can still write the letter in their personal capacity. You don't need letterhead. But I do tend to think that USCIS places a little bit more value on letters that do have that letterhead. So just keep that in mind.
CJ asks, this is super helpful for wherever it's relevant, do you recommend printing in color for filing where letterheads are involved, logos, etc.?
So I remember when I first started doing EB1A petitions, I spent a lot of time thinking about the design. I put in color and pictures. I thought about what color the exhibit pages should be. Like, they were really well designed, but USCIS has taken all of that away. Like I just described how we have to print the entire file and ship it to USCIS. It's very demoralizing and discouraging because all USCIS does is then put that through a high-speed black and white scanner and then electronically push it over to whatever officer is supposed to review it. So the printing and shipping of these cases is just a massive waste of resources, time, and effort. And the USCIS officer reviewing your case will see this in black and white, no matter what you do. So it is a relatively recent update. I think in the last couple of years is when this shift happened. But I no longer care about color in the files at all. Color can actually not scan as well, so everything is in black and white.
Then I'll ask, is a reference letter required to be on company letterhead?
No, it's not a requirement, but I do think that USCIS does slightly preference those letters, or they might hold just slightly more weight. The letterhead is not, though, a requirement, so technically USCIS isn't really supposed to do that. It's just kind of a trend.
So I don't see any other questions. So have you had clients applying for EB1A not be able to find specific references and in the end had to pay for like a professor reference or an industry reference?
Yes, I have had clients do this. This is particularly the case when we're doing EB1As for people who are in foreign countries. And for whatever reason, they do not want their professional network to know that they're relocating to the US. Maybe they're afraid for their job. In a couple of countries that I've worked with, it would actually be seen as disloyal and could potentially get them in trouble with government authorities if they were leaving. So sometimes it's impossible for reasons that are outside the client's control. And I do paid letters in those cases. Like, I have submitted cases where we've done 3 or 4 paid letters. Not just 1, but 3 or 4.
But if you're US based, then that's...
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely submitted cases with paid letters, even for US based clients. I just really push them to try not to do that. The other thing with this is, an independent reference letter is not a hard requirement. So if you are out there and you have a really strong EB1A case and you want to proceed and file, and the only thing holding you up is not having this kind of letter, I might recommend paying for one. But I've also submitted EB1A cases where we don't include them, where we only have letters from collaborators or supervisors or managers, and they can still be approved. Like with many things in EB1A, there's no requirement, there's no hardline rule. It's all about what looks good when you're presenting a comprehensive case to USCIS. So you have options. Don't let anyone tell you this is a hard requirement, because it's not. It is just usually very helpful. So in cases where you can't source from your own network or you don't want to, I would recommend looking at a paid letter. And then if you don't want to do that, or if it doesn't make sense for your particular case, like if you can't find a real expert in your field through these paid services, at that point you can submit without.
And this is the same for an IW and O1, right?
Yeah, same for all types of cases that the reference letters are typically submitted with.
So great information, thank you. Janelle, last question. What does a strong reference letter refer to? Can you please clarify?
Can you clarify the question? I'm not 100% sure what this one means.
So I guess she just wants to know what a strong reference letter looks like.
I think I need a more specific question here. Or sorry.
Vinod asks, reference letter, can we submit a different field?
I'm not sure what that one refers to either. Sorry, everyone. All right. Let me think. What are the other questions that I've been seeing about this? Oh, just one thing of note. I talked a little bit about this earlier. A lot of people are really reluctant to reach out to other experts in their field, and this is where like how you've built your profile and how you've set up your career can really come into play and really matter. Like, um, for example, many people do not claim the membership criterion because it's very difficult to meet. But having memberships in professional associations is often super valuable for the EB1A cases because it gives you access to networks of experts like this who can potentially provide a reference letter for you. Like if you have attended a couple of mixers or webinars or events and then had some kind of written correspondence or communication with some of these top experts, sometimes you can reach out to them and ask, hey, like, can you do a review of my CV and provide an independent assessment or endorsement? My attorney will write you the letter as a head start, which you can then modify. This is great. So whenever you're doing EB1A profile building, don't undervalue the development of those networks. Like, don't only focus on activities that will get you strong criteria. Also make sure that you are building your networks, generating a claim, talking about what you're doing, and hopefully building some relationships with other top experts in your field.
So let's just take two more questions. Last one. What would be the framework to get the reference letters? Like, which all criteria, originality, credibility, reputation specifically?
So I kind of talked through what the independent reference letter should include, and that's really what we're talking about in this call is just the independent letters. The independent letters will often cover something like leading or critical role or original contributions. Sometimes they might factor in by describing a membership. So sometimes they factor into the criteria. But I look at the independent expert reference letter as the purpose of it being more to affirm your acclaim and less to affirm the individual criteria. Oftentimes, other experts can dive in deeper into your work, into your contributions, because they know you and they know your work. So those types of letters are more suited to go towards the criteria themselves. The independent letter is more broadly focused, where it's talking more about general acclaim.
Strong reference meaning VP, director, colleague.
Okay, yes. So the independent reference should definitely be from like the highest qualified person in your field possible. An independent reference from someone who is at your same level, like unless you are claiming leading role and you are the CEO or you are the VP, it probably won't have very much value. Especially if you're a technical expert. So if you are a principal software engineer, like a lead designer, those kinds of things, you will want a letter from someone who holds a top position, like who is a CEO of an important company or like part of the C-suite in a big company or like a top professor, top academic with really strong Google Scholar profile, all of that kind of thing. So you do need a strong reference when talking about independent references. The higher you can go, the better.
If paid reference letters are okay to submit, does it mean paid media also works?
Yeah. So paid references, you disclose the relationship, right? You're not trying to pull anything over on USCIS. It's very clearly on the record, and it needs to be on the record. So USCIS will take those into account in the spirit in which they were offered. So it's not expecting a top reference or anyone to make anything up because everything's clearly on the record. Paid media is a little bit more sneaky because there's nothing that the paid media gives to you that affirms that it's paid. So I wouldn't really equate these as the same thing. That being said, there is no rule against submitting paid media spots to USCIS. You do have to be very transparent if you are asked about them, but there's no rule against it. That doesn't mean it's a good idea for a lot of cases, but I have definitely submitted cases where some of the media spots were paid for and very clearly paid for, and I've still felt confident in doing that. It's something that I assess on a case by case basis.
All right, that was the last question. Thanks, everyone.